And thank you everyone for joining us. And I'd just like to say, I love the idea that anyone can be new to Zoom at this point. That just like, oh, remember those days? Oh, the good old days. I'm going to read two poems. Thank you. Un-American. My mother transfers the last marigold from a pot to a patch of earth that she's carefully bellied out beneath her. The dirt cool as a penny, her fingers tender with the bright petals as she demonstrates how what's uprooted can return to solid ground. Her colonial English, helpless against her native tongue's prayers. Allahu Akbar, my mother says as casually as she says my name. The wind, warmer than the water from her morning wudu, continues its pilgrimage east, a steady stream of fireworks chasing it in the distance. My mother looks at me all shine, her dreams quietly wild in her garden. She says the rain can do in Nigeria what no sun will ever do here in South Carolina. Her shadow, my only relief from the Confederate heat. High noon, work done. My mother settles in on the front porch, where my father swallows the landscape in his hands. Leaning over his shoulder, she watches him sketch another promise. His wife and last child digging in the garden. Our likenesses, figurines forever in a charcoal amber. In his mind, my father is always building shelter. The spirits that haunt him like mice in the walls. Oranges for Christmas, a single pair of khakis to last all year. His mother on her knees, Murphy oiling a white woman's Alabama home. The heat licks the corners of my father's sketchbook to a curl. He draws God's shadow right down to the horns. In the garden, the bees burn their tongues on sprouting chili peppers, turning the honey mad. Fireworks splash against my parents' American dream, a switch that turns all their ghosts on. Children prowl the street with sparklers in hand, impatient for the holiday to dusk. I look for the ones like me and my sister who, not born in this country, can never be president. My sister upstairs, asleep in the relief of this independence. Returned from college, she still never shed the gate of our barely remembered home country. My longing could drive a car. Citizen I am to our parents' wounds. My sister and my blood, the scar healed between them. Half of us never owned, half southern lynched. Strange fruit. Watch as I pull the slave out of me. How un-American to wear the names of what they fled. My grass-stained knees pledge allegiance to a country that belongs to no one I love. So, this last one I'm going to read is called Ida, and in Islam, Ida is a period of mourning usually observed by women. Ida, only when the surgeon approaches does my father stop crying, his heart sputtering, spent. The anesthesia along begged for reprieve from being a layman in the morning rooms of woman. 6 weeks my mother's been gone, and the surgeon drags his fingers across my father's chest, explaining how 3 calf vessels can rescue the heart. Already gowned, my father listens ambivalently, 1,000 miles from those first nights where he lay side by side with his grown daughter in his wife's bed, the two of us desperate to keep the other breathing. In the morning, he washed dishes, I dried, together slowly domesticating our suffering, both unsure if his fatherhood could stand up to the light. From his hospital gurney, my father gazes at me as though staring across a fog-covered lake. We are twins afraid to be separated. Years later, when I think of my father, nurses wheeling him down that white corridor, the growing distance between us making his body smaller, then smaller. I will recognize in us the rescuer's dilemma and the drowning man flailing out at sea. My desire to be the savior, then the choice, him or me. Thank you.
That was really fast. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. I think I'll read three. They're a little too short and one longer. Something about the way I am made is not made to make sense. I stretch my insides across pages until my pain is upside down. Peonies and tulips bloom red and pink from my back, bent like washerwomen's knees, full on shadow. But I could have neon feathers if I wanted to. Faux apparatus of flight. I could have cultivated in error the bad luck of odd numbers. Spectators claim ancestral innocence as ever. A suit 2 sizes too small for escape, and inside the coveted dance, I first look down at extraneous steps in shame. For all my notes and vices, I still long to stop the false fight for my humanity, allowed to share a history of anything but suffering. I have a method of letting go. Asthmatic child in a house full of smokers, I crawled once under toxic clouds to find my mother. I was so brave I almost died, or desperate. I wanted her more than breath. I was so small and she could sing anything alive, almost. She didn't really know, doesn't know now. She is familiar with duty and made me so I can't live on that loss. In 1977, a bullet turned my brother into dust. His 18 years here, an invisible talisman we hold in our callous living. Sometimes I think my mother smoked to pretend to breathe him in. I slept when I couldn't move. Black girl, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? And that is Lead Belly from Black Girl in the Pines. I slept in my own bed in need of replacement. I slept sitting up against a steel bunk in Illinois winter next to military strangers. I slept beneath a run of pipes on a destroyer, and I slept with a failed guitarist. I slept on his brocade couch in the valley and left before I could remember his face. I slept in the deepest part of Watts, in my lover's grandmother's house, with a view of an abandoned lot overgrown with weeds and drug trash. He kept his mouth persistent and unfamiliar. In a dark turn, I slept in a bathtub dispossessed. I slept with love and treated myself to unkindness. I slept after repeating myself alone, and I slept in a friend's guest room, hey Ashaki, with a broken window, and listened to nameless strays killing what they eat. It's hard work. When I was small, I slept with 3 sisters the same size in a house with the gas cut off. I slept with a man who hated himself, and we slept in a beautiful bed in a loft with a downtown view, and he brought me red wine and cold water. I slept happily in hotels when I could escape. I slept in a cottage and wrapped myself in a crocheted blanket in sorrow and wrote poems about my animus. I slept on the floor in my father's house. I never slept in the brick 1-story my grandfather built, and sometimes I feel like concrete. I slept in the palm of my own black hand. I slept when I couldn't move. I slept in a place that hadn't been built yet and dreamed the sheer violence of the future. I slept inside a song with a blacker voice than mine, which meant I slept good. I slept in the orange light of day silence. I never slept on the street. I slept in the knotted hair of my sister's children in Detroit and watched and combed it in the morning. I slept when I couldn't move. I slept in the California desert, free of bodies and trees. I slept in senescent lake muck. I slept through earthquakes and El Nino and never stopped traveling. I slept in my car on the side of Fountain Street at dawn, and my car shook from the traffic, but I worked all night and couldn't wake up. I slept in a rented studio apartment in Brooklyn with roaches and the aroma of methamphetamines climbing through vents and under the door and dreamed about work. I slept to the repetition of Cesaria Evora. I slept on a feather bed and let myself dream a cracked blue. I slept in a red dress and sparrows woke me in the morning. I slept in a black dress and saw a hawk in my grandmother's magnolia. I slept in my beauty, and in sleep I knew that beauty as an inheritance and couldn't be stolen or strung up or caged or appropriated effectively, and it's mine. And what I have to own, I have to love it. I slept where I was born, and a rude wind pushed me into exile. I slept in the infinite arrangements of Prince's instruments. I slept out of dreams when cranes cut the sky in an era of smog. I slept in San Joaquin farm country, and there were too many kinds of molesters. I slept when I couldn't move. I slept in on a Sunday next to the radio. I slept crying every night for a year when I failed at my best thing, but I kept him alive. I slept in a world I forgot to love sometimes. I slept as if I still believed in rescue. I slept expensively and poorly and middle class. I slept when I couldn't afford to. I slept in stolen Frisia. I slept for a moment in snow and reclamation. I slept in Hajira and wasn't cruel when I slept. I slept in kinship with my faults. In a dream, I was hopeful and slept when I needed a radical silence. I slept next to a man's portrait with someone else, and more than once I didn't close my eyes. I slept in a lie, and the comfort felt so real, it was real. I slept as if I were years. I slept so many years I couldn't find. In sleep, my eyes dreamt the nearness of waiting and couldn't touch it. I slept in the clues I couldn't wake from. I slept in hidden cameras and microphones. I slept in secret and in public. I slept so sure in a used place and so anonymous like womanhood and so hypervisible. I slept in a kind of fire and became it. I slept in a place of brilliant bones and the future of blackness. I slept when I couldn't move. I slept in a simple way. I slept in a place just for us. I slept where I could see it. All right. Now me and Hafizah finna talk.
Yeah, we are. I love that poem, Khadijah. I love that poem.
Thank you so much.
Because like repetition is so hard, you know, and it looks easy until you try to do it 3 times in a row, you know?
Right. And they're like, yeah.
You're like, never
Yeah, that
mind.
poem was like twice as long. Chop, chop.
Yeah, I bet.
I feel like one thing we could talk about is like place.
Mm-hmm.
And our relationship to it in our work, and
Yeah.
maybe our relationship to it now that we're sort of stuck in one place. So how did you think about place when you were writing Un-American? It seems like such a giant question that could easily fall to the periphery.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think I kind of think of America as like a nowhere place when you're, especially when you're black, but like when you're a person of color, essentially when like you're not like oh, well off straight white guy, you know, you're not, you really can't locate yourself anywhere in this country. And so it is both like an absence and a presence. And then like, how do you essentially build a life on like multiple sites of quicksand? So, I mean, I think like that's like kind of, I mean, because like, what is America? Like, I mean, it's stolen, you know? So like there's, and then like, where do you go from there?
There has to be reparations. You have to repair
Mm-hmm.
the harm done, or we see the result of the absence of repair.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you for place?
I feel like I moved around a lot when I was little. So place was just like, was always about discovery,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in really bad ways. When you poor and you just gotta move because your mom ain't paid the rent, that's really bad.
Yeah.
So place is, it has changed for me. And I think being more stable myself as an adult has made a
Mm-hmm.
difference. I feel like I was looking for place as some kind of a balm, like looking for beauty and looking for
Mm-hmm.
stability, but I don't know that I necessarily found it, you know. I didn't read the poem about my grandma. She's been in the same house for more than 50 years, almost 60 years. And she bought
That's
it
wild.
in a white neighborhood because she could pass for white. That's the only reason she had the house.
Yeah.
And she had to just like wait out the neighbors' ignorance, for like a decade.
Which is terrifying too. Like, they get hip too
Right.
fast and then,
I mean, her husband came to sign the papers and the realtor was like freaking out, but she couldn't do nothing about it. It was already done. But
I mean,
it's
especially
like,
60 years ago.
I
That's
know.
bold.
It was bold. And she was just like a secretary at Pitney Bowes. And well, a couple of her relatives passed for white and left the family. So it's always been this, America's this, when you say nowhere place, it's like a liminal place that you pass through, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like, even though the narrative is settlers, it feels
Yeah.
liminal at the same time, at least
Because
for
like
us.
I was like talking to Camille about place like a couple of weeks ago, and like one of the things she reminded me of is that like place is defined by who brings you there, and so
Yeah,
one of the things we were talking about is that like when our parents say American, like they're always like talking about white people, right? Because like it's clear who this country is for. And so I think it's just like, yeah, how do you, because you always have to be ready to run, you know what I mean? Like
I
with
do.
like like always be ready to get got, like you're always trying to outrun that in this country. And so like how do you build a home on that, but then I think, but like that's why I think, you know like place can be so many things. Like I think like when I read your work, I definitely see like places like also like being like the body, and so like
Yes.
when you're black, like place has to be mobile, you gotta like be able to like get your go bag. you know
Yeah.
you always have to be ready. And so I think that like that's why a home for, I think, for especially for black people, is defined by like like moments with people and the comfort of people, who's coming in and out, who's sending monies home, who's still trifling, all of
Yep.
that.
Yeah, one of the poems I had was I want dreams like the one last April where my family all lived in a safe place. I want to know who's
Yeah.
walking toward them on the street.
Yeah, but then what is a safe place?
That's why it's a dream, child. You have some dreams in your poems. I want to know if you think about that, like the role of dreams in your work.
I mean, because I feel like I don't dream a ton, and like when I do, like I just can't bring myself to like get up and write it down or even text it to myself. So it's just like, I'm just like, if you want me, you have to come back, you know, like fight your way into my subconscious, because I've tried to be that person who's like got a dream journal, and like I just don't have the discipline for it, and I like to sleep. Um,
Oh, sleep is the best. Or how are you
yeah,
sleeping? Are you sleeping okay these days?
I mean, yeah, I can pretty much sleep through anything. I mean, like, but like I wake up at like 6 no matter what. So like I try to like have like a good bedtime, but it's been like harder to get up, in the
I
COVID
do.
days. You know.
I wake up at 3. I sort of pass
AM?
out at like 10:30, then I wake up at 3, 4.
To do what?
I don't know. My body's just like, everything's fucked up. How about let's look at it and doom spiral for
Yeah.
3 hours when you should be asleep?
Oh my, have
Doom
you always
spiral in the dark.
has it always been like this?
Um,
Like moms just
honestly,
get up early.
yeah. I mean, I am a mom, and my son has a habit of playing video games until the wee hours, and sometimes it will be a cackle that wakes me.
Oh,
Yeah, a really loud man cackle.
oh God.
Surprised it's not
Who's
happening right
there?
now. So yeah, that's part of it, and part of it is just it's hard for me to stay asleep. I don't know if it's like an old leftover military thing or what. When I used to have watch,
Mm,
but I didn't
yeah.
keep a dream journal. Sometimes I'll wake up in a dream, then go away, so I'll write. And I just
Yeah.
write something. I'm not writing
Yeah,
too
I
much
feel
these days,
like
though.
for me that like there's just like there's so much to make sense of in my waking world. I don't know if I have the emotional bandwidth to go processing a dream. And then, I don't really, I just like, I don't know, I just like don't remember a lot of my dreams. Or like, if I, it's just like, they're always like, they're either like super weird or boring. Or like, if I have a dream about my mother, it's usually like, she's usually speaking in a language I don't understand. So there's not much to do with
Mm.
that, So yeah.
I have real witchy dreams, girl. I dream about scorpions 2 weeks in a row when the pandemic
Are these
first started.
premonitions?
I have weird dreams whenever stuff happens.
You let me
It's
know
really
what's
not
happening
enjoy.
two
It's
weeks
not
before the
joyful.
election. Let me know
I'm gonna try to sleep, as much as I can before then. So
I
yeah,
mean, like, who knows what will happen? It could literally go either way.
yeah, that's depressing.
I know.
Can you talk about the process of making? I noticed you like how I segued out of that drama, that sad doom spiral.
Yeah.
You talked about art, you talked about gardening, and you are a writer. Do you want to say if there's like a relationship between those different kinds of making for you?
Well, my dad is a visual artist. He painted this picture that hang outside my office, and this is
Gorgeous,
a. Mhm.
gorgeous.
Thank you. It is a painting that he did of my mom 9 months pregnant with my sister, when we lived in Nigeria. And so, like I was like raised by a maker, so like I was so when I think about it, I was essentially raised to see the world twice. I saw it like, with my eyes, and I saw like my father's interpretation of it. And so like, making has always been a part of my life because of that. And then growing up, when we lived in Ohio, my parents had a black art gallery. My dad taught at the University of Akron, like he was an art professor, but their main thing was they had a gallery. So our life was essentially like just like a never ending MFA workshop, like people are just still like except but like with like Africans and black radicals. So it's like a bit more fun.
I wish I want to go to that MFA program.
Yeah. And I think like the nature of Africans is like Africans are always making something, whether it is like, clothing or just literally like making like a wrap on their head, into some type of style. Or so there's like, because like you're dealing with like the leftovers of colonization, so you have to like get creative, and in terms of gardening, like my mother, everywhere we lived, my mother had a garden, and so that was just like that was one of the things that she did. And so I was always like raised with that. We always had like a garden like lassoed around our house.
How did that translate into poetry for you? Have you thought about that?
I didn't like realize it until I started to go overboard with plants. It's just like you can't even see all the plants that are in here. It's just like one more and it's gonna get weird. um, like I know it's bad when I bring a new plant in and then I have to spend like 20 minutes figuring out where can I scooch it in.
I
um
just got some plants and I was repotting them and I ran out of dirt. So
I mean, just order some off of Amazon. I hate to say it, but
I
or just
ordered
like
it
go to
from
your
Home
local plant
Depot.
shop.
Yeah,
You made a grown man. Send him out.
he can't. He's no, he got issues. He can't go outside. He
Well,
got a lot of
plants.
health stuff.
I will say
Yeah.
it's like it takes a lot of work. You have to be careful about going out of town, but like I
No
will
danger
say
of that now.
right. But I mean, like, I will say that, like, before you can't see, but over here I have a palm tree.
Ooh,
But
pretty.
like, I never knew how long it took a palm tree leaf to open, or just like being able to like watch plants change. And I mean, like, I think there is something like amazing to that about like the type of it. It's like a different type of attention,
Yes.
which I like.
Yeah, when I was making art regularly, when I first got back to it, I had an art teacher who told me to draw under the object, like draw what's beneath the object. So when you
Hmm.
say a different kind of attention, I think that is certainly something from art practice that I try to
Yeah.
bring to poetry, or that I do naturally because it's a habit now.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, I think that like also to your point, I feel like that you also like with like the way you do form on the page, like synesthesia. I love that. I feel like that's almost like like its own type of like art because like it's hard to use space like that, you know. It's especially in a way for it to signify something. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think I definitely see that too.
I definitely think compositionally when it comes to white space, I'm thinking less of language and more of composition, like all the things together, sound and the way that it looks aesthetically, and just how like how the words look literally next to
Yeah,
each other, along with the meaning.
yeah.
You know,
I think like my obsession is the line break. Cause like one, it's just like you get to like have so much control over a person you're never gonna see. You know what I mean? So like like and so you can but like you can essentially like jam different meaning in people's like you can like
uh-huh.
force them to see that it's not all as it seems. Like when I love it when a line means something completely different than like the sentence it's like a part of, and like when people can do that, like, well, I'm just like, you know,
Well, I taught your poem about in the voice of Michael Brown and over the summer, and I know that student was a Republican. He had to be, but he was like, I think had the line breaks not been so amazing, he might not have had his mind changed because you turned it the way you turned it in that
I
poem.
change a young white Republican's mind.
You made him recognize that Black lives fucking matter.
What? I
Yes.
guess all those years at a white college paid off.
I mean, at least that's what he put in his paper. I don't know if it's true or
All
not.
right, all right. Thank you for telling me that. One.
Yes,
All right.
one
So
down,
I a billion
8
more to go.
million to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It keeps going back to the doom spiral, doesn't it?
Well, at one end, I'm just like we've always
There's
been
no
in a doom
escape.
spiral. It's
Right,
just like who's
right,
been paying attention, and
right. Now
like
everybody has to.
yeah, and I think that like the one thing that not just the one thing, one of the billion things that I think like distinguishes Black people is that like we've always been able to fight for our lives and simultaneously enjoy ourselves and have a good time.
Yes.
It's like people don't realize that like this work is impossible if you do it alone. Like that's why like
That's right.
I remember growing up there'd be times like you couldn't tell the difference between like your parents laughing versus them like talking about like politics or just like or just like the revolution, especially like in the 90s when everyone was trying to get back to Africa, whether been there or not. Like so yeah, I think like that like so I feel like I'm not afraid to or like resistant of like the doom because just like that is a I think that there's a way to accept the doom of this country and still be an optimist, you know, which
What is it?
well, I mean, I think that like to like we always live in like this side of dissonance, like like I was talking to someone earlier today about like I've always been baffled by the idea of patriotism and like as like like you've served in the military so maybe you can help me understand this because just like the idea of patriotism is just so confounding if you know a stitch of history. You know what I mean? And it's just like who do you think you're talking to right now with this and like what is the patriotism about, especially given just like all the death and destruction it takes to create this life that we have, whether through, the complacency that we used to accept it. But it's just like, I don't know. So I mean, it's like I'm used to like living in opposition. Like there are
That's
flags
right.
everywhere.
But
I'm from
the
South
flags are
Carolina. All the kids
used.
I went to college with wore Confederate flags. These are
Oh,
18-year-olds.
they're just like repeating what they've heard without
Yeah.
thinking critically. The ability to think critically is woefully underrepresented in the population, especially of people who call themselves patriots.
Yeah.
Because in my view, John Brown's a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all the Black Panthers were patriots. I
Yep.
feel like people who are asking, demanding, telling America that here's what your Constitution says, and here's what you're doing, and they don't
Yeah.
match. So match it the fuck up, are
Yeah.
patriots. So the people who are trying to enforce this pretense of freedom as the opposite in this
Yeah.
1984 sense, this Orwellian
Yeah.
sense of opposite day, um,
Yeah.
are the opposite of patriots. They're fascists, and
Yes.
people have been so afraid to say it. And I can't live in fear anymore. I'm just tired. It takes a
Yeah.
lot
I
of
mean,
energy to live that way.
yeah. I mean, like, and that's like what this country wants, because at the end of the day, like, we're essentially like, America is a ghost story, and we're still inside the haunting. Is kind of like how I think about it, because like this place is spooky as fuck, right?
That's what I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you about that. Like, how do you think about haunting in your poetry?
Like, I think, I've been like actually thinking a lot about like haunting for something else that I'm writing, and this idea of like, you know this idea of like there's like hauntology, like there it is, like idea of just like being haunted by an absence and presence. But also I love it because it just sounds like a word that an old Black person invented, hauntology. And I just like can't get over the fact it's there. And I'm just like, but like, when I'm thinking about like like everything that's happening right now with like policing, and like policing is just like the haunt of the overseer, that's like playing out. And like this is like an old thought, like KRS One has that like lyric that goes from like overseer to officer,
Right.
um and so you know I think there's like there's like the haunt, and then there are the haints, and like there are a lot of like haints around this place. But like I think that like Black people have learned how to make flashlights to see in this darkness.
Yeah.
There's this playwright Daniel Alexander Jones, and like he's got this like one person show called I think like Jemima Jones, and there's this scene where he's talking about like his aunt like sitting out and like just sitting out on the porch and watching in the night for just essentially the KKK. And she talks, and she's in the dark, and Jemima's just like, how can you see anything? And she's talking about how like for Black people there is a type of witness that can literally light up like the dark,
Mm.
and so I think of like hauntings essentially like that. There's like the haunting of this country and the way we are essentially like light up the dark. My dad likes to say that like if Black people didn't believe in democracy, we would burn this place to the ground. Can you imagine if Black people didn't exist? This country would have
It would be
been in
so
ashes.
boring, actually.
We would be, I mean,
If it
like,
wasn't in ashes, it would be boring as fuck. It would be so unseasoned. Nobody
I
would
mean,
care about America.
I mean, America would have been fascist. Like, I mean, by 1900, all white people would be slaves too. Like, you know what I mean? This place
Right.
would just be sheer. I mean, it would be just ridiculous. Just like I'm reading Cass, and just like hearing, just like even the Nazis thought we went too far. Like, it's like they have a point though.
Well, there's that quote from Kiesi Leamon's essay that was in Vanity Fair. And he was saying when they get caught out um, with their ignorance, they just double down on it. And we're seeing that come to pass. Like New York and Portland and Seattle, like they can't even
Yeah, we're
protest.
anarchist jurisdictions
Now they're
now.
anarchists. When it seems to me that that's what Republicans are because they stole the election and now they're forcing their ideology on everybody
Yeah, they're
by
homicidal.
literal, yeah, they're
Yeah.
homicidal.
and suicidal. You know, they warned
Right.
us
That's what I
when
will
we were
never
growing up
get.
that a mind was a dangerous thing to waste. And this is what they meant.
I will never understand that. A friend of mine, a guy that I was dating before the pandemic, and I couldn't date him anymore because his dad was a Republican.
Oh
And his
no.
dad died of the virus.
Oh, that sucks.
And he was just like not careful. He was not careful. He thought the numbers were a hoax, like all this stuff. So they
Here's what
don't,
I
if
think
I
the
get it, if I get it, I get it. So you don't care about whether you live or die. You don't care about the people who are mourning
yeah.
you. So
And
what can
here's
poetry do in the middle of all of this? Sorry, go ahead.
well, I mean, like as a reader or as a writer, you know, I think that's the
Either
question.
both.
I mean, I think just one as readers for reading comprehension, which this entire country needs to work on. Like for that alone, keep your mind challenged. But I mean, like I think that like poetry is a way to not be alone. Like what else can you read like so
Mhm.
quickly? You know that like and that you don't have to you like have like a sit down like commitment. You know, you can just like read one poem. And so I think for that alone, I think like poetry is like super important when you're young too. I mean, like I still like have like the first books of poetry like my parents gave me like on my shelf, you know, and it's just like I think no matter every minute someone loves to be like poetry's dead. But you know what? The moment someone is dead, you know what they love to tell you to let you know this person had a full life? They love to write poetry. Like, you know, like
Yep.
everyone loves to tell you when someone loves to write poetry because people know that like that regardless of what the like the larger dialogue is like poetry has meaning, but like no one knows what to do with anything that exists outside of capitalism, you know? But like as a writer, I think that like, you know, I like understand the limits of like my skills in the world. Like writing is a thing I'm good at and like it's your job to do the thing in you that you have to do. And so I think of, you know, poetry as a certain type of attention, you know, like and just I think there's like no other genre that is as varied as poetry. You know what I mean? Like you can have like someone like Carl Phillips who knows more about the comma than I know about the entire English language. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you can't read a Carl Phillips poem without getting out of breath. You know what I mean? And it's all grammatically correct. Um,
Right.
you know, so you have like you know you can go from like him to like Claudia Rankin like um to like Ocean's work. There's like so many like varying
Yeah,
ways
I'm
to
reading this
be
right
attentive.
now, finishing it
Right.
up. Kiki Petrosino.
I need to read that
Freaking
because I love
incredible.
Over Red Border.
Yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, they're just like poetry is just like it's a future project, you know? And like that's what writing should be, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, we have to keep imagining, and poetry does that in language, and it also is a connector, right? It's
Hmm.
intimate and worldly at the same time. It is a place for
Yeah.
us to think and feel together and imagine together.
Yeah, because especially when there's like a book of poetry that like knocks you out every page, like no one could handle that in a novel. You'd be like, you know what I mean?
It's too much. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be like, But I think there's something about like there's like a different type of like freedom in poetry, and then like poetry you can get away with just like in a line break, like saying it all without having to like told any like the details, you know.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's
Yes.
like it's like there is like an armor to it that I think I appreciate,
I agree.
you know.
I wonder if anybody has questions for us before we have to move on with our lives down back to the doom spiral. Are there any audience questions?
Where we fight from the doom spiral. Where's Rashada? Does
Yes.
she have a question?
I don't see no questions. No open questions. Well, I guess I wanted to. Oh, I asked all my questions. I was going to ask about rootedness or shelter and what that means in your work. Like, do you feel like poetry is a kind of shelter? Or do you feel grounded in language? Is that a thing that can happen?
I don't know, because part of me is just like so black and practical that a shelter is a roof and you pay that on time. Like you pay that
Are you a
first payment.
Virgo? Is that what's happening right now? Are you like an earth sign?
I'm a Leo. Leo Virgo
Oh,
cusp,
okay, cool.
you
Okay,
know?
see. All right.
um, but I mean, I don't know. I think that especially now that we're sheltering in place, it's hard for it's like I feel like we've entered that time when metaphor fails, you know, and I think that like in terms of like ideas of like shelter, metaphor definitely fails now, and in terms of like it's more perilous than it has ever been before. And so yeah, I think that you know, I think like other writers have like written like, you know, who like live in like, you know, deep war torn places, talk about how like violence can make language reach its limit, you know, and like America just has such a unique type of violence, you know, like you can like go all day without seeing the police and the police can be everywhere, you know. And so yeah, I don't know, I feel like that language is getting real tired right now.
I feel like when I was housing insecure, like we were homeless before, we lived in hotels and things like that, but we could always go to the library. So
Yep.
I did feel like there was a place for me, my imagination to go
Yeah.
in books to escape the circumstances that I was in. But I feel like now I'm less able to escape circumstance, ironically, even though like my situation is pretty straight, you
Yeah,
know?
well, you got like, or you got a child, so like, how can you ever escape? You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah,
I think like that's part of it. And like, who can escape now? I mean, the idea that escapism is even a possibility, I think, is just like a wild privilege. Um, because this country is trying to get us in like absolutely every single way. And I think that like, you know, white people just aren't used to this idea. I mean, the last thing I would ever believe is that this country trying to kill me is a hoax. That's like, you know what I mean?
right.
That's like the one thing that's always been factually true, you know? So like like talking about like this vaccine, I'm just like, first of all, I'm not getting this vaccine
So
till
I know it's working. Yeah, not
like
not
till a
not
white woman
experiment on
has
me.
a baby and I see the baby. You know what I mean?
I love that logic. That's perfect.
You know what I mean? Then we'll know. I mean,
Yeah.
like, you can't even get like acne medicine in this country without it causing wild problems. So just like, I'm just like, I'll wait. I'll wait.
Until we can recognize that caring for people is more valuable than killing people, we're just going to keep repeating the same behavior.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that like many of us do, you know, I think this like goes back to like the conversation of like, I feel like the death of empathy is all the rage right now. And like people just like empathy doesn't exist. I'm just like,
It's
I don't believe
wrong.
that because I'm just like, okay, yes, white America has ruined the word empathy, but like they ruin a lot of words. Just forget about that. But like, have you ever been in a black community? Of course, empathy exists. Have you ever been in a community of color or like with poor people? Empathy exists all over the place. It's
That's
just that
right.
like empathy doesn't exist in the power structure, you know?
Correct. It
Like,
has been engineered out.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like by design because like empathy is a tool of liberation, you know, so it can't have any place in capitalism.
So we can't escape through books, but we can connect through books. I think that's maybe what the evolution
Yeah,
is now. And we can
but yeah,
learn and we can imagine.
but I also think that like but I think like we can like also find solutions. I mean, like everybody should be
Yes.
reading Angela Davis, like
Should have been
everyone,
read. Should have been
right? It's
read.
just like but hurry up because we're in quarantine, so you've got some time to finish that book, you know. But yeah, I think that people like, I think that the most important things people can be reading right now is like Angela Davis, like the work of like Black trans activists and like disability justice. Those are the three things that people should be reading,
Right. Because they're
and
on the
like
front lines of that care that we're talking about, how to
yes, and like
institutionalize it.
exactly, and just like by leaps and bounds, and also like you can't get free without those communities, and like also why would you want to? Like what kind of freedom is that?
I found myself thinking that just today because there was a door that wasn't accessible. Like if you were in a wheelchair, you would need somebody to help you open the door.
Yeah,
Like, but if all of our doors were accessible, we wouldn't have to worry about touching doors and getting
exactly.
coronavirus. I wouldn't have to have a door glove on my
Oh
hand
my
when I go out
yes.
because the door would be auto-fucking-matic.
Well, it's kind of like with like everything else in this country, they try to make, Black people and indigenous people invisible because as they push everyone towards that line, no one recognizes it. And with like, when you think of like, disability, for most people, it's this narrowly defined idea of like that disability looks like this. And so if it's just that small community, then you can just like marginalize it out. And so they're
Except one
constantly
fifth of Americans are disabled.
exactly. And just like, and also the only people I see talking about like what of how much COVID is going to like expand that are like people who are doing the disability justice work. And so it's just like I think not doing the reading just wastes so much of both your time, other people's time, and it's just like, and then once you start
You
doing
just
the
want to like fast forward, like push people. Like
yeah, because
we
just
can
like
have it right now. We don't have to
yeah,
wait.
and that's the thing, people don't know because people aren't doing the reading, they don't even know to be embarrassed about what they don't know you
Yeah.
know it's just like yeah.
Lord help us.